Chapter 13. A Surprising Command. "I've found the hiding place of that puppeteer!" Nancy exclaimed from her perch in the tree. "What's up there?" asked Officer Clancy. "Wait until I pick up the clues. I'll show them to you," Nancy replied. There was silence for a minute or two. Then Nancy started down the tree. "Will you catch these? And please be careful of them," she called to the men below. Through the air floated a piece of black cloth, a jagged square of gray suiting, and several bits of pink tulle. "What in creation are these?" Officer Smith asked in amazement. When Nancy reached the ground, she explained. "The man we were trying to catch last night wore a long black hooded robe. I'm sure this is a piece torn from it. The gray one is from his suit." "But he certainly wasn't wearing pieces of pink net," Officer Clancy spoke up. Nancy grinned. She was pretty sure these men knew nothing about the dancing puppet. For this reason, she merely answered, "Chief McGinnis will understand. Please give these to him. Have you something in which to wrap the pieces?" "Yes," Officer Clancy replied. "In the car." Officer Smith opened the door and brought out a waterproof bag. He dropped the evidence into it and promised to take the bits of cloth at once to Chief McGinnis. "Please ask him to let me know if he tracks down the owner of the gray suit," Nancy requested. "Righto," Officer Clancy said as the men started to drive off. Relieved that a valuable clue had made the officer's visit worthwhile, Nancy returned to the house. She entered the kitchen, smiling broadly. At once, Bess and George wanted to know what had happened. "You haven't caught the villain, have you?" Bess asked teasingly. "I wish I had, but I did find a piece of his suit and his black robe. The puppet left a clue, too. I sent the police a piece of her tulle skirt." As Nancy paused and sniffed the aroma of muffins in the oven, George said, "Don't stop there. Go on with your story." "Tell you what," said Nancy. "I'll trade the whole story for a good breakfast." "It's a bargain," said Bess, giggling as she opened the oven door and took out a pan of blueberry muffins. They look delicious," said Nancy, and helped remove them from the pans to a warm plate. Soon the three girls were seated in the dining room, enjoying sliced oranges and bananas, crisp bacon, and muffins. Nancy had just finished briefing her friends on what had happened while the police were there, when Emmet Calhoun stalked into the room. "Good morning, ladies," he said jovially. "Prithee, fair maidens, extend a hungry man a crust to lift his spirits." The three girls chuckled and invited him to sit down. Bess said she would get some oranges and bananas for him. "Aren't you up pretty early for an actor?" George needled him. "Especially for someone who stayed out all night." Emmet Calhoun blinked. "You knew I was away?" When George nodded, he went on. "Friends from town phoned that they had news of a possible role for me in King Richard III and would pick me up late. I stayed with them overnight, but in order to get a ride back, I had to come early." The girls looked at each other. So Calhoun had been practicing when they had heard him reciting alone on the stage. The actor offered no further explanation, but arose and began to pace the dining room. "Ah, thereby hangs a tale, as 'tis said in the Merry Wives of Windsor." He paused dramatically. "I had a most delightful night in town. Good fellowship, good food, good music. It was as if life's troubles had vanished. Why, then the world's mine oyster, which I with sword will open. Ah, yes," Calhoun went on, "we have some salt of our youth in us." Despite Nancy's slight suspicions of this man and his unawareness of how much trouble he might be to other people, she was amused by him. His quotations were apt, and his manner of delivery was convincing. Nevertheless, she wanted to find out if there were more to his activities of the night before than visiting friends, and whether he knew anything about the puppet or the puppeteer. "Parties in town are fun," Nancy said, "but I love the country with its wide open spaces and fields and flowers and trees. Oh, I feel bad every time I see a beautiful tree being cut down." Then she in turn quoted, "And many strokes, though with a little axe, hew down and fell the hardest timbered oak." Emmet Calhoun's eyes opened wide, and he looked at Nancy with admiration. "Excellent. I see you know Shakespeare's Henry VI." Before Nancy could reply, he went on, "Did you ever think of training for the theater? You have a marvelous speaking voice. Think about it, my dear. You might become a great actress." Nancy beamed and blushed a deep red. Bess and George looked at her. They wanted to tell Emmet Calhoun that at their request Nancy had become a self-appointed understudy for Tammi Whitlock, but they said nothing. "Trees, ah yes," Emmet Calhoun went on. "I love trees, but if you must know a little secret, I am scared to death to climb one." Nancy could not decide whether the actor was telling the truth, or whether he might have been disguised as the black hooded figure and had made the remark deliberately to throw her off his trail. She remembered that Emmet Calhoun had worn a gray suit the evening before. But somehow, the Shakespearean actor, though eccentric, did not strike Nancy as being dishonest. Maybe she should direct her suspicions elsewhere, the young detective thought. After breakfast, Nancy told the cousins she was going to learn Tammy's lines in Act 3 of the Civil War play. "What about Act 2?" Bess asked her. "I think I've almost mastered them," Nancy answered. "There aren't so many in that act, if you will recall. That's where Kathy is rather prominent, and Bob Simpson, too. He's marvelous in that scene with the president, isn't he?" "He certainly is," said Bess. Then she asked, "No sleuthing today?" "Oh, yes," Nancy answered, "but give me 2 hours to rehearse first. Then I think we should make another search of the attic for clues to the dancing puppet mystery." At the appointed time, she was ready. The 3 girls had just reached the foot of the attic stairs when Emmet Calhoun approached them. "Going to the 3rd floor?" he asked. "Yes." "I'm sorry, but you can't do that," he told them. "Why not?" George spoke up. Calhoun told them that only the officers of the Footlighters were allowed in the attic. In fact, no one else in the club is supposed to go above the 1st floor. George declared firmly, "Mr. Spencer invited us here, and we can go anywhere on these grounds that we wish." Calhoun smiled patiently. "Not according to our leading lady, you can't." "Tammy!" George cried in a tone of disgust. "What does she have to say about it?" The actor shrugged. "Since I'm not a member of the Footlighters, I am not familiar with the club's rules and regulations. All I know is Tammy asked me to promise that if anyone went up to the attic, I would let her know at once." "Well, of all the nerve!" George exploded. "It's high time somebody taught Tammi Whitlock a lesson." Nancy laid a hand on George's shoulder. "Take it easy," she said. "I'll phone Tammy myself and get not only this matter, but a few more things straightened out." Nancy hurried downstairs, looked up Tammy's number in a list of members of the Footlighters, and put in the call. It was answered by a gentle-voiced woman who said she was Tammy's aunt. "Please call my niece later," she said. "Tammy was out late last night and is still asleep. I don't want to disturb her." Nancy did not know what to do. She was sure the woman was telling the truth, yet she wanted to find out whether or not the girls were allowed to investigate the attic of the old Van Pelt mansion. While she was thinking what to say, Tammy's aunt went on. My niece must be rested and in good form today. She has a rehearsal of the next show this afternoon, and then the regular performance tonight." "I see," Nancy replied. Since she had already thought of another way to obtain the information she wanted, Nancy told the woman she would be in touch with Tammy later and hung up. Nancy now looked at the list of members again and dialed the business number of the president of the Footlighters. His name was Bill Forrester, an affable man who gave a great deal of time to help make the whole amateur project a success. When Nancy told him what she had heard and asked if it were true that only the officers of the club could go above the first floor, he laughed. "Tammy is a fine little actress," he said, "but she certainly pulls some funny ones." At a recent meeting of the executive committee of the Footlighters, she made a motion that only the president, the secretary-treasurer, and herself could have access to the rooms above the first floor, other than regular occupants of the mansion. The rest of us didn't see any sense to this, so she was outvoted. "Then it's all right if I go up and look around the attic?" Nancy asked, relieved. "Go ahead," Bill Forrester replied. "But don't forget, if you find any treasures, they belong to the Footlighters." "Of course," Nancy said, laughing. She returned to the second floor, where Bess and George were still arguing with Calhoun and making it plain to him that they did not care for Tammi Whitlock. He, in turn, was defending her. When Nancy told of her conversation with Bill Forrester, Calhoun shrugged. Then, striking a dramatic pose, he quoted from Shakespeare's Troilus and Cressida. "My mind is troubled, like a fountain stirred, and I myself see not the bottom of it." He walked off and went down the front stairs. Nancy and her friends hurried to the attic. Bess posted herself at the top of the stairs, while Nancy and George began a hunt through the dusty boxes and trunks set under the eaves. The two girls worked for some time, but did not find a single clue to the mystery of the dancing puppet. George had just closed the lid of a carton and started to open the trunk next to it when something suddenly flew up into her face. End of chapter 13.